Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Turner, host of the Praxi Pod, and today we have a very special guest as we romp, towards the end of 2024, Mr. Patrick Dubois. How are you, Patrick?
Have a great day. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Absolute pleasure. So I know that you're now back somewhere nearer to home than you were before. So I know you're a bit of a gadabout. So where are you joining us from today?
Today I'm home from, I was going to say sunny, but that never exists, kind of the rainy Belgium, I would say. So that's...
Rainy Belgium. Well, you've got lots of things good going. Good. I mean, when I was in Belgium a while ago, there's actually quite a few good things good going for Belgium. You got chocolate, yeah. You got frites, yeah. You got mussels. You got beer, and obviously the final thing, which is most important, is Eddie Merckx.
Well, we've moved on since then, right? We have a few other cyclists and stuff. But one thing maybe that the audience doesn't know, Belgium is also the land of the surrealism, like the painters. And we like to have fun with it ourselves. And sometimes that plays up in my work.
So what would be an example of that?
You never take yourself for granted in a way that you're still kind of if you propose a solution, we're likely very much to be inclined to say, well, it could be totally wrong, and we could do it like this. So we're kind of like that twisting country. And the other thing that we've learned is another skill, which is we're a country that is central to a lot of foreign countries, and we've been invaded many times. So we've developed this way of being friends with everybody else while still have our own identity. So that's, we're not Switzerland, but it's close.
Well, no, that's interesting. Yeah, you raise an interesting point. Because I suppose the thing is about the relationship between Belgium and Netherlands, yeah, and Belgium and France. I remember when I'm in Amsterdam, there's always this kind of ongoing joke between about depending where which side you're on, of the perspective of what a Belgian is, what a French person is, what a Dutch person is. I suppose it's just like the things that we have in the UK, I suppose, about various different geographic locations.
Yeah, but they're all strong nations, as you call them. France, UK, Holland. They sailed the world and invaded many other countries. I think we're somewhere in between, and that's actually why Belgium was constructed as the neutral zone. So you weren't having all the wars all the time.
Well, and also you've got Brussels, haven't you? So Brussels is strategically important for Europe as well as a lot of. I mean, do you know the history about that? Why is so much based in Brussels? Then do you know the history on that, or is it just pure fluke?
I think that's diplomacy. I also think it's one of the first, is it called president of the European Union, who's actually a Belgian person. And that's because we're very good at being friends with everybody else. So I don't think it's a coincidence. And even within our country, we have, we're trying to unite four pieces, the French-speaking part, the Dutch-speaking part, Brussels, and a German-speaking part. So, we've trained for many years.
Yeah, and obviously you've got then you've got the North Sea on the other side as well, haven't you? I suppose. Interesting. Well, welcome to the Praxi Pod. So on the Praxi Pod, we talk about things that are going on in technology, and particularly about data and AI and this whole phenomenon called Gen AI that's been going on a raging debate over the last period of time. Seems like ages actually. It was interesting actually this morning. I don't know if you saw it, but there was something on LinkedIn which was very funny. So there was a hype cycle by Gartner. They're kind of like the kind of thing that goes up and down. And they said in August 2023, obviously it was the peak of expectations about Gen AI, right at the top of the kind of the mountain. There's some comments saying basically, is the hype cycle a hype cycle? Because if you looked at that where it was on the actual Gartner hype cycle, would you actually invest anything in AI and Gen AI in the last 18 months? Or would you just quite wait and see how it plays out? So it's fascinating to see people look at it like that.
Yeah, it's over the years I've seen many new technology come into place. First the internet, the cloud, mobile, all kind of new things, and I think the speed of this and the impact of this was unique. Like, I don't think we've ever seen this, instant. Everybody on the whole planet was influenced kind of by, a company like OpenAI and ChatGPT. Like, the use was for everybody. and it was available for everybody. And yes, there's people who use it for their use case and it makes sense, and others don't, and they're trying to do something with it. So obviously, these are the years where, and I sometimes phrase it as that AI stops being on the marketing budget, but needs to become on the product budget. And that's kind of what you initially saw a lot, either in innovation or kind of marketing budget. And that's tough. I do think personally, we're not near the hype cycle anywhere. It is still so much evolving as new things that can be done. Maybe the technology is already invented, but that doesn't mean it's not going to have a long play. And that's the usefulness and the robustness and kind of, the creative ideas we're doing with, they're still flowing in that perspective. But yes, there's a bunch of people who have no use case. They're trying to shoehorn a use case. But on the flip side, there's also the people are using the AI that exists today, and the AI of in a year will have a different thing. Maybe that solves it to be profitable, strategically, or it's able to be testable, and kind of all the things that maybe hinder people right now. So that's tough to dismiss in such a hype cycle. That, hey, everybody's talking about it. Okay, that's ticking the box. Everybody's trying to use it. Yes, but are we there yet? I don't think so, to be honest.
Sorry to be, I'm not trying to be inappropriate, but it's like, it reminds me of the teenage sex thing. Everybody's talking about it, but nobody's doing it. Or is everybody doing it? I don't know.
Well, can't talk to the teenage sex anymore, but everybody's trying and exploring the field. There's a big difference between companies who have went all in at the very beginning, and some are still exploring. And that spread will just continue as we see. But the good thing is, over, let's say, the last year and a half, 2 years, what were kind of the boom started, the prices are going down. It's becoming commodity. And another narrative that I see is that, a lot, because we work in IT and there's a lot of narrative, data flowing, and kind of making it work. I think that slowly the narrative is getting away from the data science and the data story. And it's moving more to, okay, we're using it for that. We don't care. Yes, we understand that there's data and that there's generative AI, but it being useful is more important. And I think that was the same with cloud. People talked about, the data center and the infrastructure. But after a while, that was just a commodity. Everybody had it. And then we're thinking about, okay, what are we going to do with this? How are we using this differently and more strategically?
Oh, you mean like the conversation goes further up the stack? It goes from like the grassroots to the kind of more close to the customer experience.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking?
Initially, you would have a whole discussion when you go in. Oh, you have to fine tune, you have to clean your data. It's like, what? Okay, what are you talking about? We need business cases, right? So, and yes, I'm not downplaying the value or the need for this, but that is what makes it more useful, is that we're actually talking about why it's needed. For example, do you still need to understand completely how an LLM works? I don't know, right? But I can do crazy things with it, and that's fine enough. So you don't have to keep explaining me like what is a transformer and so on. That's fair enough.
Yeah, I suppose that's like any kind of adoption curve, isn't it? I suppose some people dive into the detail, but then I noticed just the tone of messaging has changed. And I don't know if you got a chance, but I spent quite a few hours, because I was doing a bit of traveling last week and over the weekend, watching some of the AWS reInvent, which is obviously this annual pilgrimage to Las Vegas. Now it's 13th year. And fantastic Friday presentation, fantastic sessions from Matt Gorman and Andy Jassy. It's quite interesting, actually. Andy Jassy seems to want to come back, even though he's the ex-CEO of Amazon Web Services. He's the Amazon. He seems to be want to go back into the mix. But Werner Vogels on Friday was an excellent session about, I don't know if you've seen it, but about simplexity, he's calling it. So how do you want to build software, to deal with complex use cases, but how do you keep it simple as well? And they had the guy that was the principal distinguished engineer, Rob something or other, but he was the guy that, they've been running Amazon S3 for 18 years with no downtime. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, if you think about that, and there's some amazing stats of petabytes, zettabytes, blah, 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 that they've got on there. I mean, just even as a service to a business. I mean, that's just like unheard of, isn't it? You normally have downtime. Never had any downtime. I mean, just managing that is quite incredible.
Yeah, and it's a good example of something. I think if you would consider the early days of cloud, everybody was about, okay, more CPUs and virtualization and building the VMs. And then it turned out like all of a sudden there's another piece that turns out so instrumental in making this happen. And yeah, it sometimes feels like, and it makes sense, right? Everybody comes with a different background. They're trying to extrapolate into the future from what they know. Me from DevOps, others from kind of data, and that all makes sense. You're trying to make sense to the world in this chaotic period, but it's also hard to see what will, sometimes it's called like natively, like, we had cloud native, what is AI native right now, what is it going to look like? And it might, like, it's slowly changing in how we do things, and we're seeing it take steps. But then you'll have all of a sudden a new way that starts emerging, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's better than the old way. It's just going to be the new way, and that like brings its own set of problems and tackles some unique challenge that we had in the past. That's the interesting part right now, is to see that shuffle going on, and that's why I think it is, hype cycle is one thing. And a lot of people ask me, so what's the biggest impact it can have? And it's like, you don't have to think about like that. It's like all the small impacts everywhere. That's the big impact. And that's
It's like a
hard
compound
to see.
effect. It's like a compound
Yeah.
effect, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed.
So I suppose for the people that are uninitiated and are going, okay, hello Andrew, why have you brought Patrick on? I suppose the question for me would be, could you do a quick intro and explain some of the stuff that you've done in the past? Because that would be a helpful context of why and also what you've been doing in the last 12 months, I suppose, as well. You built and created, I think, some pretty historic things in the last period of time. And, I think it'd be useful for the audience to understand a bit about that, because I think what you've done is you've gone from there to this new world. And I think there's some incredible transition stuff that you're probably helping people with as well on that.
Yeah. So I like to learn new things, and it's not about the shiny new things, but I learn them to get better. If it's not good, I'll tell it, and I'll try to be neutral on that. So my career has been this, jobs from being a sysadmin to being a developer to being a tester to, go front end, mobile, but also individual management, more CTO, VP engineering. So every time I change something because I want to learn, I want to get better at something, and then I bring something from the past. One of the things that I brought, like I saw in my journey, is that every time you kind of change perspective in a company, is they think you can't do the other things. Like, so if you become a developer, then nobody believes you have been good at ops, or being management, they don't think you can still code. So I try to be versatile as much as I can and kind of work from there. From there, I've also been not only interested in the technology, but also in the process. So in the people side and the cultural aspects of this, and collaboration, agile, those pieces are at some point in the career mixed in. And I was early on experimenting with Kanban in operations, more flexible ways of dealing with incidents. And then at that time, there was infrastructure as code, virtualization, and that led me to DevOps. Further, I got into more DevSecOps, platform engineering. And then after, let's say, 15 years, I kind of said, like, we kicked the can enough. It's like all the dimensions for me to learn is kind of fading in that perspective. And I went kind of more all into Gen AI. I have, from that perspective, two sides. How can, with my past background of DevOps, DevSecOps, and all the engineering practices, how can we deliver better Gen AI applications? So what does it make to be robust? Observability is different. What are the new pieces on the board for infrastructure? How do you collaborate with the data team, kind of the engineering, software engineering team? So that's one kind of side. And then the second one that I kind of focus on is, how does the whole new technology actually helps us do a better job at software delivery. So those are the two main thoughts now over the last year that I'm kind of going over, and that resulted in a bunch of talks from more robust AI deployment pipelines to what does it mean to have an AI platform team? How do you kind of scale this out in your company? To Conway's law for an organization, like what's the impact? Will we have smaller teams, bigger teams with AI? Will AI be a team member? To all the way up to, okay, how do we make sense of this new coding explosion of AI coding tools? And I'm talking beyond Copilot. What does it mean? And kind of explore that. So that's in a nutshell. So I try to bring perspectives and worlds together because I like to think in metaphors, and I like to do like mashes, like how I predicted, the things like serverless. I was thinking about functional programming and always something new on programming. So that led me to likely there's going to be something like serverless. And so I kind of extrapolate those things, and people seem to enjoy it. So.
Yeah, but I think no. Well, I mean, it's the thing is, it's actually like the continuous delivery, like agile. There's some big shifts, you could say, in thinking. And what I would say with you is that you have helped the whole industry globally to shift their thinking. So that's the thing that and obviously and also I didn't realize this actually. It sounds like you started in, you could say, ops, and then you went to I don't know whether it's the dark side of the light, by going to the dev side and the testing. You've seen it through different lenses.
Yeah.
So
even through, I had a startup for a while, and I thought I'm pretty good, pipeline, done this, I can do this. And then I started seeing even more pipelines. Hey, there's a hiring pipeline, there's a marketing pipeline, there's a legal pipeline for contracts. So you start like reusing the patterns and say, hey, well, how do you get faster feedback? How we can kind of revalidate the steps? How do we do better triage upfront? And so, yeah, that's kind of been interesting.
You got multiple sprints going. You got like a business sprint with multiple swim lanes, and you've also got your technical sprint. You can traverse that stuff across the whole business, can't you? If you grab into it really properly.
Correct. And the interesting part is that often, and maybe I did as well, maybe I did that as well in the past, you think why we're not getting more money on certain things or can't hire more people. Well, if the sales pipeline isn't working, right, then that's normal, right? So maybe we should get on a call and see if we can help them and kind of, help customers through. Or in customer support, our ticketing is quite important on the impact of the sales. So that started just to like created more and more a bigger pipeline to think about and to optimize. And then last but not least, looking at the finance and the FinOps, and funny example is always that you build it, you run it. That's cool, but if you start looking at the cost, if everybody does it like completely different with their own language, with their own tools, economically in a company, it is not about like that we're trying to force you to a certain tool. It is just not economically viable for us to do 15 of those. So we have to pick standards, and kind of that. It's only when you bring the finance aspect in there that you'll kind of start nuancing that.
Yeah, it focuses the mind. Exactly. So I mean, given you kind of I wouldn't say you went down a different route, but you took your software engineering experience, kind of like being a CTO, being a VP of engineering, running, a development shop, building products, and then you evolved it into this whole Gen AI data world. What have been the biggest takeaways or the biggest surprises, I suppose you could say, in the work you've done so far? Is there anything you've gone, wow, I didn't realize that? Anything you've come across so far?
There was a learning of, we are very used to think about the platform team as being the persons doing the cloud, and yes, anything AWS, Google, so on. And I think the pattern of introducing a new thing in a company is it start with a proof of concept, then it takes a few more teams, and then when those teams kind of get something shared, you're looking at your first shared component, and then you think about this 5 teams. then it starts being something you might want to move into a platform. So that kind of past experience of dealing with cloud and introducing cloud, or similarly introducing security as another aspect in DevSecOps, was useful for introducing AI in kind of engineering organizations. So that was something that I learned that makes sense. And it's the similar scaling. It is the similar thing that you have to run the platform, obviously build and run the platform. You have to do governance because you can't have just whatever model, you can't have whatever framework that you're doing on there. And then you have the enablement, is that you want to scale all the other teams to use the new frameworks to do that. Now it's been quite challenging. As I said in the beginning, it all moves so fast. So it's like shaky grounds, but that's kind of been quite useful in there.
When you say shaky ground, do you mean that there's not really the established standards yet? It's still kind of developing it's not you go for this area, this capability area, the answer's X. It could be X, Y, Z,
Yeah.
A, B, C still. It's still kind of shaking out. Is that right? Or is that unfair?
Yeah, I think it's whenever you put something at a crossroads, whether dev and ops, and people are wondering like, okay, where do we put whoever has to go into between? Okay, we now call that a platform team or a DevOps team, and so on.
The intersection.
So case,
the intersection. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, in this case, we have the same question. Okay, we have the data team, data science team. They know everything about how the models could work, and kind of help us with that. But the word maybe the persons who had to deal with production and engineering and software delivery. So that silo and bridging that silo, some people have called it the shift right. Compared to the shift left of security going earlier, it was actually data moving to production and having to run in production. So it wasn't something on the side. It wasn't analytics. It wasn't reporting. It wasn't kind of like building the model. It was really going straight. Okay, whatever we have as a technology, we're going to put in a real-time use case, and it needs to work. So it's not a Jupyter notebook.
So just a quick question. So they're calling that shift right now to put the data
Well,
in the
I
actual
didn't
production.
do that, but some people call this the shift right, indeed. And that push of something that was maybe seen as, oh, well, we need to have this, of course, the AI, we need to have the models, but mostly, I'm over exaggerating. In many companies, the data was the warehouse used for reporting. Other companies, of course, they build already a model and put it in production. So they kind of already were in production. The feature store and the more ML ops and kind of like looking at that. So that was already production. But for a lot of companies that were doing data science was making sense of the data for reporting and analytics. And all of a sudden they had to scramble to get close to production. So that was another kind of observation.
That's interesting. So wow. Yeah, because what you're saying is the infrastructure of AI is kind of like sat there as kind of like a container, but you have to fill the container up with your business data or your data in general, to actually make it come to life. And then obviously you have to then work out how you. I suppose that's links into another area, which is agents and process integration and all that kind of stuff, which I know we'll come on to in a second. But is that what you see? That's the mindset.
Well, it was used for the internal business owner mostly, not for the external business owner.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
And even getting that real time, like try getting something that is fresh, more fresh than a minute. No, an hour, a day from your data warehouse. So how about real time right now? Like what we need.
So it puts a different set of pressure on that operating part of the operating model. Wow.
Correct.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that, actually. That's a good observation.
And then they call the people at the intersection, they now call them the AI engineers. Again, like every term, it's bad, but those are the people who are like a mixture of the software engineers and kind of the AI data scientists. And they kind of got a name.
So that's the new group of teams that's evolving from this new architecture. And what would be, in the work you've done, what would be the use case that people would do that for? Is that more of a customer service use case or a call center or knowledge management or all of the above?
Well, I think that was also the difference between more predictive AI and generative AI, as the generative AI was more on the use case, and indeed knowledge is one thing. They're all building the chatbot or the agents or the assistants coming from there. They're also the ones that probably are closer to unstructured data, like your PDFs or Word docs, and traditionally maybe
Yeah,
that
like the policies and
was in the search
regulations,
team.
the policies. Yeah.
Yeah, that landed in the search team, but now it kind of has its own complexity, its own hardware, a vector database, and dealing with that. So that's what the new group is accumulating. So if you look at it from, there are the folks with the LangChain, the Llama index connecting to a vector database. They're likely vetting the models, which one you should use. They're the ones creating the test harness and indeed, helping the use case get going. And they're also the ones that have to now build the tests frameworks, deal with the performance and the latency issues. So it's a new skill, and probably it's indeed like at the intersection of both. There is a saying, and I'm not sure if it is true, but in the old days, 2 years ago, right? So before Gen AI, people had this ratio of saying one DevSecOps person, puts against 10 DevOps persons, put against 100 developers. So that was the ratio.
That was the ratio. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah. My account point of view. Yeah.
It might be that, we just have to multiply everything by 10 and then put the data science in front of this. They're even more harder to find, those kind of people. So then the discussion became, who are you going to hire for this new kind of intersection? And most of the people that I hear say it's actually easier to have a traditional software engineer kind of trained into the new technology than a data science engineer who was not used to production, to get them close to production. But again, maybe it's more of the cost, but there's certainly a skill set that is hard to learn overnight, what it means to run at scale in production when these things hit, and then testing and security, all aspects that have a different meaning in the data world, right?
Yeah, because I mean, I remember, there used to be like, you'd have a developer, you'd have an operations lead or whatever, and I used to use the funny Prince analogy. The artist formerly known as, he's now called Symbol, which was called, oh, I'm suddenly now, but they come from the ops side or the development side. They say, oh, I'm now a DevOps engineer. Yeah. So what sounds like what's happening here is that there's an evolution of that even now, but they're calling themselves what are going to be AI, I don't know, AI dev, AI ops, AI DevOps. I don't know. Is that the way it's going to go as well? Do you think, or is it just confuse things? I don't know.
Again, I've seen probably the first AI SRE title somewhere. I've seen the first AI security person. So it is hard to tell. And I make the analogy with mobile. Mobile, in essence, you could say, well, all teams touch mobile, but it is never in all teams. There's usually a mobile team. So for platforms and cloud, we went like all teams need cloud. So, but that's a big thing because it's not everybody needs mobile into their job. And I think AI follows that pattern of every team in the future will need some kind of AI. So in that way, I think it's closer to the platform team than it is to the mobile team.
Yeah, it's more of a horizontal than a specialized team, isn't it? Because you've got to bake it in all parts of the value chain.
Correct. Yeah. It might not feel that way if you're currently your only team is a chatbot team, which is fine, which is the first use case. You could see it as a feature team, but maybe over time, more and more of this new technology and maybe the sharing of the knowledge base or everything that was indexed for the customer could be reused across multiple teams, and then everybody has to know a little bit of kind of that integration there as well.
And if you think about the reporting line above that, are you seeing where is that team reporting into? Is the existing reporting line, or is it something that's new, it's evolving?
It depends on the company. Right now, it could be under the innovation officer incubation. But if it gets bigger, I think there's the two obvious places are it becomes part of the data engineering group or it becomes part of the platform group. I personally put it closer to the platform group. And the reason is because in production, they'll have to do with quite some cloud aspects. And even within the platform team, there is a cross pollination. My ideal, not ideal, but let's say in the last job that I worked, I had a platform team that consisted on one group more on cloud, one more on developer productivity and experience, the other one on kind of more data engineering, and the other one was more on Gen AI infrastructure and engineering. But if A needed something from cloud, they were in the same remit and they could like easily switch and clean up permissions or proxies or firewall rules. They were under the same umbrella.
Yeah, I mean, you're going down that kind of shared service route. It's like kind of like
Correct.
a centralized group that kind of can
Yeah.
serve all parties.
Yeah. But it is an optimization and it's one way of organizing. So I'm not saying this is the best, but that kind of follows the pod. It's been used now at companies as Adobe and Cisco. They're kind of all kind of using this similar pattern to go there. I do want to mention that there's also, because this is more infrastructural side, the pieces that you need. Look, a lot of people look at the book Team Topologies to kind of organize themselves.
Matthew Skelton.
Indeed, Matthew and Manu, kind of from there.
Manuel.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. It was one of the first persons who actually interviewed me on DevOps, so it's a funny story there.
Well, Matthew Skelton?
No, Emmanuel. So, please.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, worked at InfoQ at the time. There's another piece where you can align and reuse pieces for AI. It's not just in the technology, but it also exists in the platform, in the product. So if you have multiple teams implementing some kind of functionality, you might be reusing the same prompts. You might be reusing also the same style. Past company, we used colors to show whether something was generated by AI or by a human. Those are patterns that you want to have consistently across. You don't want to have like 15 different ways to show a chat interface. So again, those are things that are more in the product to make that unified there as well. So some have called this more of an AI productivity team. It's not the same word, but kind of people that align actually the product pieces together, not just the kind of infrastructural or coding pieces. And that also makes sense. But
yeah, so it's like what you're talking about there is the principle around the application, aren't you, or the product?
Yeah.
And how you get organized, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's part of the unfix model, which is a different way of dealing with kind of organizational patterns. Now I know, like they call it the AI experience team. Yeah, so it's like the unified experience for the customer.
And I suppose building on that, then, in terms of the business side, so obviously we talked about technology, but if we talk about the business side of it, so what were you seeing any different approach on the business side about how, because whether you're in technology or you're in the business, there's still like been a big education gap about what's the art of the possible. So have you noticed any nuances on that in your work recently?
Maybe one thing that I've seen is that the product owners, obviously, they can use the new technology for more prototyping, persona development, kind of work from there. The new coding tools, again, most people know GitHub Copilot, but more and more we're landing into the world of code generators that are generated from almost like business requirements. So it's not exactly no code. It is not exactly code. And somebody called it yes code. I don't know. People come up with the weirdest names. But the point is that it is.
They call it.
Yes.
Okay.
But the point is that it's somewhere in the middle of prototyping tools with actual code that can use a little bit of tweaking. But it gets the business and the point across. So we're not just looking at a prototype, not at a wireframe, but more of a prototype, which they can iterate faster on without having to wait for internal resources. So that's definitely a trend in the coding generation. And I assume right now there's three places. One is everything's going to happen on code in your code editor. which is kind of like the Copilot and Cursor and so on. A bunch of group thinks that everything's going to move somewhere in the cloud, and we're just going to give it like requirements, and you do your coding over there. Okay, fair enough. And then the other one is more on building the prototypes, not meant for production, but more on prototyping and kind of getting feedback and learning what actually works and what doesn't work. And that's a huge speed up kind of in those tools. And then if you mix both, like they get some knowledge from your company or how you do things or the style guide you have and all that stuff, then it becomes like a lot easier. And product owners seem to like this because they now feel more empowered to do this. So that's a second way. A third way is they often have, developers have a backlog, product owners have ID lists from customers for things, new features or stuff. So they also need a way to sift through this and almost like summary of feedback they get. So that's also quite useful for them to build in there. It's not per se in the product because that tends to be different from each product or domain, but it's definitely on the product ownership. They got like new tools under their belt to kind of like refine what they used to do by the game of telephone, but they can now actually do it.
So it sounds like, sort of from a benefits point of view, there's definitely some opportunities here.
Yeah, it's there's a certain way that capturing the intent from the requirements makes sense. We sometimes lose that in our tickets, or then we try to over exaggerate this. The new tools can see what is conflicting with previous requirements, so they have a better memory, so they keep track of this. It is interesting because I think code generated from specifications has been what, like 4GL, and everybody has promised that
it's been like the nirvana.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it will be perfect, but maybe I was going to say the cost is low. The cost is still high, in terms of generation power, but the easiness and the instantness of kind of us trying and correcting it is maybe up to the right level. And I draw the parallel with, I was once on a search project and I talk about 100% precision, 100% recall. So it needs to have the best results and it needs to be, the most kind of accurate results there. We found that you don't have to do it like that. If you are able to scroll pretty fast through all the results that are not good, then you can go less under 100% precision. And it's exactly also what Google does, right? It's not like always perfect, but they make it so easy for you to navigate, and that cost of then being non-perfect. We've had the similar thing in, we used to say it needs to have like 100% uptime. Now we assume the failure and we just live with it, and we have a better way that we architected it, and that kind of is better.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about there is diminishing returns, isn't it? You can over specify what the requirement is. That's what you're saying, I think. Is that right?
Well, you can over specify it, but it is. I was alluding to it might indeed not be perfect because it's under-specified as well. But I think collaboration on this will be interesting. Imagine you have, I think when you lived through the period of UML, everything had to be specified. Then Agile came in and said, well, we don't need all the docs, and kind of they became like the bad thing to do. Just give us a bunch of diagrams, we'll run the code, we'll be more flexible. Maybe the pendulum now goes up to, okay, let's try to describe the minimum in natural language so it is easier and we can work from there. We can build you 5 prototypes and you just have to swipe left or right whether you like them. And so that kind of easiness overcame the burden of having to have the perfect specification in there. And then if you put all the requirements from security, performance, and business requirements in the same diagram, kind of the same bucket, and then you start thinking about the better solutions, that could be useful in the way that we can actually collaborate on this instead of having to find out when things are already in production from there.
You mean the testing in production scenario?
Well, it's a lot of knowledge is, either not there in a company or it's lost. And it is also very weird that things like performance, uptime, and all this, they're known patterns. And for some reason, we'll have to always reinventing the wheel in our own company and doing it differently. So maybe if it becomes more like a constant tutor or a verifier with all the knowledge there is, it stands a better chance than saying, well, you have to follow an education. That's it. And now we don't have any money left for education. Figure out the rest of it yourself. So that could be, an uptime of having that constant base of knowledge available through the AI while you're doing stuff. So it's in constant learning. It's in context learning, in context governance, however you name it. But there's quite a fast feedback cycle that we weren't able to achieve right now. The other day I thought like, okay, continuous integration, continuous testing, deployment, delivery, and it almost feels like we're back to optimizing the first bit. It wasn't the delivery part, but kind of from business requirements to actually code that gets implemented. We're back at that round of implementation and improvement.
Oh, so you're thinking about the infinity loop?
Yeah, indeed.
And is there a version of that for AI and Gen AI these days? Or is it the same thing just with different labels? Or is there additional stages, or is it the same stages? You say?
I have a hunch, but it's not more than a hunch right now for me. And the more we start using AI tools to improve what we do, is that the more that we'll rely on what we give them. Okay, AI needs data. We all know that. But what does it mean in the SDLC? When I can generate my code, when I can generate all the things. The new coding tools, they're on the search for every context they can to give you a better result. It's not about you saying in a comment, this is what I want. No, they want your Jira tickets. They want your GitHub, your whole repository. They want your wikis, your confluences, all the stuff. They want your diagrams of your architecture. And I believe that we're going to start.
Just when you were saying that, it reminded me of like that famous film, Little Shop of Horrors, with the plants that was always wanting to be,
more.
To drink the blood. Feed me now. Feed me more data. Feed me. It's like the Triffid plants. This is like the latest LLM model.
Yeah, I sometimes
maybe there's an opportunity out there. Maybe one of these, they have these funky names like Llama. It's like maybe you should bring out one called Triffid. So Sam Altman or Jeff Bezos or Matt Gorman, if you're listening, Sanjay Pichai, you heard it here first.
Also say in my workshops, how do you solve problems that come from AI? You solve it with AI. That's basically it, right? So that's the rat race we're in.
Coming back to this virtual circle.
Yeah. So coming into the more context, the more you give it, I believe that if we have an improved wiki and a clean wiki and a good wiki of content, if we have good code, if we have good test coverage, the amplification factor of these new tools will actually also be higher. Now, these tasks have always been daunting in the past because, have to keep it up to date. And now we have a new tool in our belt who actually allows us to do that continuous governance and clean up and all stuff. So we might stand a better chance at, like, when we use that first to get our house in order, we actually also make the tools generate better things than more generic things or the way we want things from there. Maybe that's the AI coding flywheel or something, right? So if you clean up code, you can do more code. I don't know what it is, but there's a certain truth in there. Again, it's a hunch, but that's kind of
that's what you're saying is where the productivity benefit is, because you're freed up on tasks that you're not able to laboriously have to do, but then you can redivert that capacity somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then we start actually cleaning things up, and then maybe eventually we reach a point where the results are good, and that's one piece. I think that there's a second piece about all the things it produces. We need a better way of reviewing things. So that's, you see that the more it generates, the more pressure is going to be on us humans understanding what it does and then having to decide where it's good and bad.
Well, that's what I was going to say about. It's like that goes back into the kind of validation and testing and approval. Is that what you're kind of touching on?
Yeah, but the point is that we, LLMs on itself, they hallucinate, so we can't be sure what they do. Okay, when we use that, whatever we're going to generate could potentially, have something. So we'll have to compensate this with other tools or traditional coding scanners or traditional testing tools, kind of as a safety net. Now, if you know that it's not going to be perfect, then you have a few options. Either you say, well, YOLO, just in production, we'll see it, we'll live from there, and we have a safety net in production. You could call that resilience engineering, right? We've engineered that it can't do bad damage. We'll pick it up. We have observability. We're all good. You can do another way, and people have been doing this for database deployments where they're also a little bit scared when they change the schema, and it's like, oh, we don't know, A/B testing, all that stuff. But it is, some cases you exactly know it can only go from state A to B. And, we know exactly the side effects of this. So we can rest assured that, if it wants to move, that's fine. If it doesn't, we kind of know the risk. We know kind of the exact, cases there. So those are things that we can let go. So point of that is looking for those cases and dealing with this. And then there's stuff that still needs to be reviewed. Okay, well, the better it gets, the more we get tired of having to look at the screens. That's going to be the typical AI paradox of, the more you do it, and then the less you get good at it. So, and then it actually relies on you. So that brings us to the next point, is dealing with the issues when we're not certain, when the impact is possibly high. And I predict that while a lot of the tooling is now on AI coding and generation and productivity, that set of tools will also kind of improve. There's a concept called the moldable development environment. It's called also with the Glamorous toolkit, the fact that you can change the way your IDE looks for your business case. There's also now something called the moldable exception, which helps you kind of understand the exception and deal with it. So that's the whole thing that we learned from resilience engineering and automation in the aviation industry. We have to train people. When there's failure, we have to understand the known cases. We have to keep like the black box to know how we're going to deal with this, safety regulations, and that's still coming after kind of we get better at the code generation, in my opinion. But again, it's all hunches and predictions, but that's how I actually see this evolve in there.
I mean, that's an interesting analogy with the airline industry, with the black box and things like that. Because it's the mission criticality. I suppose if you switch these things on and you put them in the face of the customer as a brand reputation, a customer experience as a revenue risk and all that kind of thing, there's a business risk. How do you put the you don't want to put the shackles on it, but you also want to make sure you've got like I won't say a contingency plan. It's more like a way of doing root cause, isn't it? And then fixing that root cause as you go forward, or if you have some kind of unplanned failure.
Yeah, and that situational awareness when things fail, you cannot just do this right off the bat. You'll have to train for these situations. And that's maybe all the time we're going to gain with code generation. We're going to spend on training to deal with like when the failure is happening, like the fire brigade or something. And that's going to be interesting to kind of get us up to speed to deal with that. And also deal with
but that evolves the kind of engineering skill set, doesn't it? It evolves the engineering role and the skill set and the focus. It switches
correct.
slightly.
Yeah. And there's also the adjacent things, like if I'm automation fatigue, I always click yes. So you want to avoid that. There's the burnout. If you fly too much, you need kind of like your downtime to recharge and rethink, because you could get into that flow of coding. And it just keeps coding and tells you, okay, next feature, let's go from there.
Well, maybe you need like what's it called, a tachometer? The thing when you're a HGV driver, you can only drive so many hours.
Yeah.
And you have to take a break. Maybe it's that kind of starts being applied to developers.
In Agile, they called it like with the Pomodori technique, that they put like the egg thing, right? So who knows, right? So that collaboration. I understand the people who say, well, the coding is right now just a faster way of typing. And I think they're right with a Copilot, but I think we're going to get past that. And it's not just going to be in the coding. It's now multi-file, back-end, front-end, designs, and that kind of collaboration, I hope, will move back on the stack of, having the right conversations on what we should build and not how we should build everything. But you still have to understand what good looks like. And that's going to be the hard part, is training new people on.
Which is the human oversight piece.
Yeah, indeed.
Because I mean, I think one of the things when we had that session the other week was, before we did this episode, was you showed me, within, I think it was in GitHub, was it in GitHub, and Cursor, and you were showing me, basically how the tool was actually basically generating all the code, and you if you prompted it right, but then obviously you had to do that kind of sanity check on top of that, but that converted you from actually hard coding it all in or copying it from a library or importing it or whatever. It's just incredible, really, the productivity gain.
Yeah, that reading mindset is it's everywhere now. It's also funny, the story about I don't know whether it was you, but there's people generating now emails with Gen AI, and they craft the perfect email, and then on the other side we have the managers who have to read the emails, who are like, please summarize this. so there's the next compression decompression in there.
Well, you've got the person generate using Gen AI to create the email that sends the email to the other person, and then the other person uses the Gen AI to create the response to send back to the other person. Just like just take the human out of the loop.
Yeah.
One of the things, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there seems to be this kind of mad kind of furore around agents now. And I saw this very bold thing. SaaS is dead. The future of AI is agents. Any thoughts on that?
So the way that I see it is that everywhere where we had in the past just the LLM does generate, you can replace this with agents. And with the agents, we can get the whole RAG tools and everything, and it will likely generate better results. So in that way, if you're just relying on the LLM, that is not the best way of doing things. Now, the problem with the agents right now is that trying to do this in an autonomous way and having it in a longer cycle will have quite some latency for responding. So that needs to get faster for meaningful things in the day-to-day interactions. But in general, when you have a lot of compute and when you have kind of like you can make this fast, then it's definitely going to be a differentiator in the results. There's the people say LLMs can't do math. Yes, but if you put an LLM with a reasoning and you give it a tool, a calculator, it can do math. So it opens up like a new set of functionalities in there. But then you need a new kind of infrastructure to run those agents and to give them a sandbox. And then we're back to, okay, now we have to figure out that piece as well. But I do believe it has a very high potential of giving better results than just the LLM in there. But the LLM for knowledge, then LLMs for reasoners, which are different LLMs, combine that with the tools, and then have a memory, because that's also typically a fundamental thing, is that it doesn't need to repeat itself, then yeah, you get like way better results. So I do think that's definitely something on the radar.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like because of the black box mentality of the models, then I suppose the thing is the agents brings it to life more, so it kind of connects that to the business. It kind of uses that as the bridge.
Well, you could say that, but I think it's a technology trick to make the most out of the LLMs in a certain way, right? Okay, that wasn't perfect, but now we have a way to control it better and to give it like better answers in there.
Which is back to the precision and the accuracy and that kind of thing you talked about a bit earlier.
Yeah, correct.
So we are now a few weeks away from the end of the 2024. Do you have any, I don't know, pearls of wisdom based on your journey so far that you think you want to predict and say, well, I think by the end of 2025 or 2026, it's going to be X and Y and Z. Any thoughts on that? Any 2 or 3 or more or less? Or any big ones that we've not seen already?
So if you think what's after agents, and I start to see the first steps of knowledge management in general. Your 15 developers, they do it like this, and this all of a sudden becomes knowledge. So that's definitely something, but you can extrapolate that to whatever you do in the business. And we're not using that knowledge when somebody leaves the company. And it's not just something that lives on the wiki, but it's something that keeps being up to date. So that knowledge
it's kind of alive and dynamic, isn't it?
It's definitely something that I would look into it being evolved. I haven't seen this built into coding tools too much. Like the first hint I saw was from a tool called Devin, where you're coding with it and all of a sudden it starts to us. We think that's a very important piece. Should we save this as knowledge? So it is just a fragment of while you're doing things, it keeps track of this, right? So that was a great example, I think.
So it's building up your asset base as well.
Yeah. And then from there, similar to what we talked about, dealing with the unknown situations, I believe that there's some part, well, I don't know how big the industry is, but there's going to be an industry about learning the things, getting faster up to speed with your code base, dealing with the failures. I don't know what it is, but that kind of learning experience from the knowledge base would be my second kind of extension into the journey, and will maybe have to be more versatile. That today, if I'm really taking it out, today we're supporting the sales app, and tomorrow we're supporting kind of the traffic app, and we just need to be fast on speed to kind of ramp into a new field. And maybe that comes helps in there, because from knowledge it becomes like, how fast can we learn? It's not just about having the knowledge, but kind of how fast can you use it. So anyway, that will be my kind of.
Well, I suppose the thing is on that point. I mean, there's great points there actually. But the thing I was going to say was that the predicting the failure. So predicting the failure of what using the platform and the knowledge that you built, then that's value add, isn't it? Rather than actually, normally you would get people in. I don't know how you did it before, but you get people in a room and say, okay, let's have a brainstorm about all the points of failure and where it could, and what's the plan B, plan C, the fallback plan.
Yeah, it's interesting because I get that question on incident response a lot. Oh, we can use Gen AI to create contextual awareness. We got all the documentation, we got like the exception, what the customer was doing, all the pieces we have right now, but we can kind of digest that into a more understandable form, and we can ask questions about it. And then I always say, well, you're hindered by your imagination in a way that most people then say, and then we're sending off an email to Andrew about this, that they should do something about it. But you should really think about, like, why can't we spin up a similar environment to what the customer was doing, what he has, and what they can actually reproduce the whole issue, and then come back to us and have a decision. Because maybe they already are able to suggest a fix for the issues. That is kind of taking it a step further, is like what we were going to do manually, part of our job. Why can't we have that tool do that for us and have us?
Oh, you mean a bit like self-healing? You have a self-healing software.
Well, self-healing would be the ultimate, but even saying I'm gonna, fork the repo, create a feature branch on this. I'm gonna iterate this, and I'm gonna try and see what was happening, instead of just having documents or knowledge presented to me, but take action indeed on this on our behalf, and then present the results back, maybe for final.
Oh, you mean like using the system as a proxy?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So again, it's like you have to think broader. It can do many things, but it's currently not that easy yet.
Yeah, I mean, what you're raising there is the thing about the silo mentality of, usually we do this piece of work and then we throw it over the fence on an email. Correct. It's somebody else's responsibility. I'm going to wash my hands of it. Where actually, the infrastructure is not an issue anymore. It's not a constraint. And what you're saying is the real-time environment and replicating that environment is not a super constraint either. So why not? It's a bit like a simulation, isn't it? You could create a simulation. Is that kind of the route you're going down there? Is that in that?
Yeah. Why not try, right? And why not try a few of them if it becomes so cheap and easy to do? Like I was in a session a couple of weeks ago, and there were all people creating AI coding tools. We had a session about learning from production and learning from logs and things. And similar to what you said, is they're very much said, I'm a developer, so my logs is what I see, my ID of what I'm coding. And I was like, no, we're learning from the log from production, right? So imagine that the AI is coding something and changes a file. And all of a sudden, it takes into account that that file is used by 99% of our customers. Would you treat it differently? I think you do. and kind of those.
Yeah. I mean, you raised the thing about testing, isn't it? It's about like, what are you what data set are you using for the test? Is it that classic thing? Is it a frig? Yeah, you're frigging the test to get the right results for it. Actually, if you can get it close to production, then you're going to get a far more accurate and quality output.
Yeah, there's even a tool
close
right
the
now
gap and close the gap
that starts doing, like, we know A/B testing, and it's usually something, a label, a color, or something that can be done. But they trying to hook it up, like it's actually recoding a few of the possibilities there as well. So those are interesting kind of times we're heading
Wow,
into.
that's yeah, that's really interesting. To kind of sets your mind going, doesn't it, about all the different scenarios you could do that. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you.
Who knows? Next year, Andrew.
Yeah, we'll have to do this as an annual event. We have to come back, Patrick. Were your 2025 predictions? How accurate were you? Well, actually, we simulated it, and actually, we were more accurate.
So do you have like any kind of projections in there?
Projections or protections?
Projections for next year.
I mean, I definitely feel that people are getting their arms around it now. I think, if you look 12 months from today, like late 2023, people were still like, oh, like rabbit in the headlights. I feel like, especially seeing some of the stuff from reInvent last week, there were some very good case studies. And, I think people are realizing they can't defer it any longer. But I think what I'm also seeing is people trying a small number of use cases, and then depending on the size of their business, is it national, international, national, regional, or global? How do you validate that? How do you actually get your arms around it? Because you don't want to switch on like 2,500 use cases on 56 markets, and then how the hell, how do you manage that? The change, I suppose. How do you manage the change and the adoption? I think that's what I'm seeing, is that people are still, I wouldn't say tiptoeing around that, but they're being careful about it because it's organizational fragility, you could say. So I think what I would hope to see next year is more bravery, more courage, doing a bigger scope, but also you'll probably get the cycle working better as well. So I think there's still an education gap.
Yeah.
A big education skills gap, which I think, you've talked about in today's session as well, and I know we talked about some scenarios from before about where people, I'm not saying it's like the Luddites, but, it's, certain organizations, you've got to win people over, you've got to upskill them, you've got to then help them to be continuous learners. And that's part of the organizational evolution. It's funny because I did that go-to conference session back in October 2023 in Copenhagen, with the Trifork guys. And, what I was saying was that the beyond Gen AI thing, I didn't predict agents, but I was predicting organizational transformation was going to accelerate, but also roles were going to accelerate. Roles were going to evolve. There's going to be new roles evolving, which is what you confirmed today. But also some other roles would switch in their definition. So where do you spend your time? Okay, you've got this label of what you are. What is that in the future world? The beyond Gen AI piece. But, then about how people embrace that change. Some people want to keep just going down that certain route because that's what they've always known. And as we both know, I won't go into a Charles Darwin quote, but, the only people that's et cetera, yeah. So, yeah, I think but then that's not technology, that's people, that's humans, right? But I think I remain positive about it. I think it's just people they're not throwing caution to the wind. They're just going to be, I think we're going to see much more bigger ROI and bigger impact. And I think the education thing is something that everybody needs to still keep embracing. So that'd be the kind of call out to the leadership thing.
Yep, sounds good.
But next time you see, well, I'll be in Belgium, and we'll be eating, mussels and frites and chocolate and beer at the same time, maybe, which is a bit of a mess.
We can do that.
Sat on a bicycle. No, that's wonderful. Thank you for coming on the show today. It's been an interesting little soiree, like kind of snake kind of around those topics, because I think you also kept the topics at the right level for people to, because I think there's this bit about thinking about where you are today and then also where you need to get to. So I think there's some really good guidance that you've given there, which is appreciated. So
Good. And
that
if
was.
I can do a plug for my YouTube channel, Jedi
Well, I was going to
Forever.
say, yeah. I mean, if people want to know more about, people want to know more about Patrick, even if they don't know anything about Patrick, or they want to know more, where's the best place to go?
Well, these days I post more on LinkedIn. I started on Blue Sky again, but LinkedIn is probably one place for getting in touch. And then all my talks and past talks are on my YouTube channel, Jedi Forever, with
What's
the
it called?
digit
What's
Jedi Forever with the cipher or the digit 4. So I'm a Jedi Star Wars fan, so from there, and so all my talks are there, and it's a variety of different topics, but now most of the time around software and Gen AIs.
cool? So that's JEDI number 4 and then ever.
Indeed.
Well, I should have asked you. See, I could have put my Darth Vader outfit on, and then you could have put your, Luke Skywalker or I don't know Han Solo outfit. You see, or Chewbacca even maybe I don't know.
Yeah. It's when I yawn that my kids say I'm Chewbacca.
I'll hold you to that. That's a good quote. That's a good quote. Actually, we could do a meme out of that.
Yeah.
Lovely to see you today, and thanks for coming on the show. And see you soon.
Right. Thanks for having me.
That was Andrew Turner, host of the Praxi Pod. Thank you very much.